At my father's funeral, our longtime family lawyer suddenly gripped my hand tight and whispered mysteriously, "Please come with me right now. There is something extremely important you must see before it's too late." He then emphasized, "Absolutely do not let your husband know." In the freezing winter cemetery, I looked back at the man I shared a bed with, who was watching me from afar with calculating eyes. A wave of intense anxiety washed over me. I immediately turned and walked away. And as the office door swung open, this story begins at a funeral, but it won't end where you think. Before we dive in, drop a comment for me. What are you doing while you listen? Working, driving, or taking a moment for yourself? I read every comment quick. Some details are fictionalized for storytelling, but the heart of this message is what matters most. Vernon Sterling's grip tightened on my arm, pressing into bone. His whispered words cut through the heavy funeral silence. "Mrs. Mercer, come with me immediately. Don't tell your husband." The cemetery stretched cold and grey, under bleak January clouds. A bitter Chicago wind, carrying the scent of frozen earth. Mourners clustered around my father's grave in dark wool coats, their breath-forming white clouds that dissolved into nothing. Vernon, 62, had been Arthur Vance's corporate attorney for 2 decades. A man whose silver hair matched his unshakable reputation. Now his fingers dug into my forearm with an urgency that made my pulse spike. I glanced toward the gravel path, where Julian stood watching. Julian Mercer, 33, my spouse of 5 years, wore a tailored suit that cost more than my monthly earnings. He had lowered his phone, eyes narrowed, calculating the distance between the elderly lawyer and me, with the precision he usually reserved for quarterly corporate reviews. My husband, who had long ago stopped seeing me as anything but a convenient asset. "I don't understand," I whispered back. But Vernon was already releasing his hold, stepping backward into the crowd of grief-stricken colleagues, as if our brief interaction had never occurred. At 30 years old, I was the quiet laboratory technician everyone overlooked, standing at my father's burial, with a chemist's eye for detail and a wife's burden of silence. I tested water samples and safety protocols at Vance Enterprises, the company my father had built from nothing into a $75 million empire. I knew how to measure contamination in parts per million. I knew how to identify toxins, invisible to the naked eye. I did not know why. My father's trusted legal counsel had just warned me against my own husband. Julian began walking toward me across the winter grass, his expression shifting into the concerned spouse mask he wore for public consumption. I turned away, moving instead toward the funeral homeside entrance, where Vernon had vanished. The limestone building loomed Victorian in sambre against the grim sky. Inside, the hallway smelled of wax and lilies. Vernon stood at a closed door, one hand on the brass knob, his face carrying an expression I'd never seen before, something between guilt and profound apprehension. "What's happening?" I asked, voice steadier than I felt. "Elena, this is difficult," he said, using my first name for the first time in 20 years. "But you need to see this before anyone else does. Before Julian does." He opened the door. The office was small, dim, furnished with a mahogany desk and 2 leather chairs. A woman stood by the window, backlit by weak afternoon light, holding a manila folder against her chest, like a shield. I recognized her instantly. Victoria Sterling, 28, stood trembling in a dark dress, her hands shaking as she clutched medical files. She was the woman whose photo I'd seen glowing on Julian's phone at 2 in the morning, the night before. Her face caught mid-laugh in some upscale downtown restaurant I'd never been to. wearing diamond earrings. I'd never seen my husband purchase. Elena, Vernon said quietly. This is Victoria Sterling, my daughter. She has information about your father's passing that you need to see. The room tilted slightly. Victoria was Vernon's daughter. Julian's mistress was the attorney's child. The connections webbed out in my mind like complex chemical bonds, forming structures I didn't want to comprehend. I didn't know he was going to die. Victoria said, voice breaking. I swear I didn't know. She thrust the folder at me. I took it automatically. My laboratory trained. Hands steady even as my thoughts raced. The folder felt heavy cold. Like evidence pulled from a crime scene. What is this? I asked. Biochemical test results, Vernon said. From Arthur's last 8 months. Results that were never included in the official medical examiner's report. Victoria was crying now. Mascara tracking down her cheeks. I work at the private lab. Julian asked me to. He said it was routine follow-up. That Arthur wanted private health monitoring. I didn't question it. I just processed the samples and sent the results directly to him. To Julian I finished understanding, blooming like a slow-acting poison in my chest. Who brings a secret lover's evidence to a funeral? And what kind of death requires a lawyer's whispered warning? Victoria nodded, tears falling faster. I didn't understand what the numbers meant until after he died. I'm not a toxicologist. But when I heard heart failure at 70, when I saw the funeral notice, I went back through the data files. The pattern, the sinusoidal graph. I called my father. And he told me I had to hand this to you. The first page showed my father's name in cold, institutional typeface. Above rows of numbers I couldn't interpret. Biochemical markers, concentration levels. Date spanning 8 months. Data that looked clinical. Until I noticed the graph on page 3. The line curved up and down in perfect waves. Rising and falling. Like a sine function. From my undergraduate chemistry classes. Beautiful in its symmetry. Terrifying in its precision. I stared at the graph. My laboratory training. Screaming that natural, biological processes didn't create patterns. This was artificial, controlled, deliberate. Vernon, I called through the closed door. He appeared immediately, as if he'd been waiting in the hallway. Did you find it? I found a graph. I don't understand, I said, holding up the page. These measurements, what compound are they tracking? Vernon's face went grey. He pulled out his phone. I'm calling Orville, he'll know who's Orville. My hands went cold. While I'd been trapped in the greenhouse. While Julian had been searching my truck. Someone else had been here. Searching my apartment. Going through my things. 15 minutes later, Uncle Orville Vance, 65. Arthur's younger brother and retired physician. Arrived with rain still clinging to his grey overcoat. I'd seen him at family gatherings over the years. But never paid much attention. He was the quiet uncle who talked about medical journals. And avoided corporate discussions. Now he stood in the dim office. Examining the files with the focused intensity of someone reading a death certificate. Where did you get these? He asked. Voicemail. Victoria Sterling, Vernon said. She processed them at the private lab. Sent results to Julian, not to Arthur's physician. Orville's hands tightened on the pages. These are thallium levels. The word hung in the air like poison gas. Thallium. I repeated, my chemistry knowledge flooding back. The poison's poison. Tasteless, odorless, mimics heart failure symptoms. Exactly, Orville said. He pointed to the sinusoidal graph. This pattern shows thallium being introduced to the body in small regular doses over 8 months. Elena, someone did this deliberately. Your father didn't die of natural causes. He was murdered. The office walls seemed to contract murder. The word I'd been avoiding. Since Vernon's first whispered warning crystallized into medical certainty. The pattern. Orville continued, his physician's voice steady. Despite the horror of what he was describing. Shows increasing doses. Probably testing tolerance levels. Whoever did this was methodical, scientific. They were calibrating. In chemistry, a sinusoidal curve means deliberate manipulation. The kind of pattern you see when someone is testing dosage, adjusting for body weight, calibrating for maximum damage with minimum detection. Can you prove this? I asked in court. These files are proof, Orville said. Private lab results that were deliberately hidden from the medical examiner, combined with tissue samples from the autopsy. Yes, this is evidence of murder. Vernon's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his expression tightened. Julian is looking for Elena. He's asking the funeral guests if anyone's seen her. I need to go, I said, standing. If he finds me here with you, take the files, Vernon said. Hide them somewhere he can't access, we'll need them. I slid the folder into my coat, feeling the weight of my father's murder pressed against my ribs. Orville and Vernon left first, disappearing into the funeral home's main corridor, while I waited in the shadows. When their footsteps faded, I sat back down in the dark office, alone with the truth. Thallium poisoning over 8 months. Small regular doses. Someone with access to my father daily. Someone he trusted. Memory hit me like chemical burns. 8 months ago. Julian coming home with a small, wooden box wrapped in brown paper. Your father's health is declining. He'd said, setting the box on our kitchen counter. I got these special herbs from a contact overseas. Rare stuff, very expensive. They're supposed to strengthen the heart and improve circulation. But you're the scientist. You measure them properly and make sure he takes them daily. I had been so touched by Julian's concern. My husband caring about my father's health. Spending money on expensive supplements. Trusting me with the proper dosing. I had used my laboratory scale, measured exactly 25 grams each morning. Dissolved it in filtered water. Brought it to my father with breakfast. Watching him drink it down, while he thanked me for being such a devoted daughter. Every single morning for 8 months. The sinusoidal graph in the medical files tracked my precision, my care, my laboratory-trained exactness administering poison. I had killed my own father. The thought tried to drown me, but I forced it down. With the same discipline I used to control laboratory experiments. Guilt was a luxury I couldn't afford yet. Later, when Julian was destroyed, I would have time to feel the full weight of what my hands had done. Now I needed to think. Julian believed I was the grieving daughter, the overlooked wife, the quiet laboratory technician, who measured water samples and asked no questions. He believed I would never suspect, never investigate, never understand the chemistry of what he'd made me do. He was wrong. The same knowledge that made me the perfect instrument would make me the perfect destroyer. I understood toxins' reactions, mechanisms of action. I knew how to measure, how to test, how to prove. I knew how to be patient, methodical, precise. Julian had taught me exactly how long a slow poison takes to work. I sat in that dark office, no longer grieving, no longer confused, just cold, methodical, and waiting for the right chemical reaction to begin. My father was dead, murdered by doses I'd administered with my own hands. But Julian had made one critical miscalculation. The same precision he'd exploited would be the instrument of his destruction. The funeral was over, but the investigation was just beginning, and I knew exactly where Julian would go next. To my father's mansion. To begin claiming what he thought he'd won. I drove to my father's mansion, with the medical files hidden under my passenger seat. And cold purpose replacing grief. If Julian was going anywhere after the funeral, It would be there. Every light in the mansion blazed against the January night. Through the study window, I could see Julian's arm, draped around my stepmother's shoulders. Champagne glasses raised in celebration. I parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot, staying in the shadows. The January cold bit through my funeral coat. My focus narrowed to that lit window, to the scene playing out inside my father's sanctuary. Chloe Vance, 58, Arthur's second wife of 12 years, stood draped in designer black silk. That cost more than my monthly salary. She was laughing, head thrown back, in a way I'd never seen during my father's life. Julian leaned against the mahogany desk, holding a champagne bottle like a trophy. I crept closer to the window, pressing against the cold brick. To Arthur's legacy, Chloe said, her voice carrying through the glass. Finally in the right hands. Julian clinked his glass against hers. The board meeting is Monday. By then all the paperwork will be finalized. Mark and Orville won't know what hit them. On the desk between them sat a Vance Enterprises organizational chart. Even from outside, I could see Julian's name circled in red at the top. Chief Executive Officer. The chart wasn't fresh. The paper looked worn, creased from being folded and unfolded. The handwriting in the margins showed notes, dates. Strategic planning. This wasn't something drawn up after my father's death. This document had been prepared, refined, studied for months. They had been planning this while my father was still alive, while I was measuring out the poison that would clear their path. What about the daughter? Chloe asked Elena. Julian's voice carried pure contempt. She'll do exactly what I tell her she always does. Quiet little laboratory technician. Never asking questions. She doesn't have the spine to fight back. They hadn't even waited until the funeral. Flowers wilted before dividing up my father's empire. Like vultures over carrion. My hand slipped against the window frame. The sound was soft, barely a scrape. But Julian's head snapped toward the window. Our eyes met through the glass. For one moment we stared at each other. The husband who'd made me his unwitting accomplice, and the wife who'd just discovered what she'd done. Then Julian smiled, cold, calculating. He moved toward the front door. I could have run, but something kept my feet planted. Maybe rage, maybe the memory of my father's face when I'd handed him that morning water. Maybe the medical files still hidden in my car. The front door opened. Julian stood backlit by the chandelier. Elena, he said, perfectly calibrated between surprise and concern. What are you doing here? I could ask you the same thing. The funeral was 6 hours ago. I'm handling estate matters. Someone has to keep the company stable. He stepped closer. But you saw us through the window, heard us talking. No point denying it. The organizational chart looked very prepared. Very pre-planned. Julian's false concern evaporated. His expression shifted into something predatory and precise. Come inside, he said, not a request. He led me to the study where Chloe had vanished. The organizational chart still sat on the desk. Julian's name circled like a target. Achieved. Julian pulled a document from the drawer. Emergency Property Management Authorization. You're going to sign this tonight. It grants me temporary control of all estate assets while the will is being processed. I'm not signing anything. Yes, you are. His voice was flat, emotionless. Because 6 months ago, I installed a security camera in the mansion kitchen. High definition, time stamped. And it has 8 months of footage showing you preparing Arthur's morning water. The floor tilted every morning. Julian continued, precise as surgical cuts. You measured exactly 25 grams with your laboratory scale. Dissolved it in filtered water. Brought it to your father with breakfast. The footage is crystal clear. You're even smiling in some of them. How long had he been planning this? Installing cameras documenting my movements. turning my daily routine into a noose around my own neck. You made me do it, I said, but the words sounded weak. Did I? Because the footage shows you alone, measuring substances, preparing drinks. No one forced you. Just a devoted daughter caring for her father. Except the father ended up dead. From the exact substance you were measuring. How do you think that looks to a jury? My throat tightened. He was right. Without context, without proof of Julian's manipulation, the footage would look exactly like he described. A daughter poisoning her father. Sign the authorization, Julian said, pulling out a pen. Or tomorrow morning I hand that footage to the police. They'll see you as the laboratory technician who poisoned her own father. For inheritance. 20 years in prison. The medical files flash through my mind. Victoria's evidence, Orville's confirmation. The sinusoidal graph. But none of that would matter if I was arrested first. If Julian controlled the narrative. If he destroyed the evidence before I could use it. I needed time to think. Time to find whatever my father had hidden. I forced my voice to shake. Played the overwhelmed daughter Julian expected. I need 10 minutes. Let me go to the greenhouse. I can't think straight, please. Julian studied me, weighing whether this was capitulation or resistance. Then he nodded, confident in his victory. 10 minutes, he said, then you sign or I make the call. I walked toward the back patio door, feeling Julian's eyes tracking every step. He thought he'd cornered me with that camera footage. Thought he'd turned my laboratory precision into the perfect weapon and the perfect frame. But he didn't know about Victoria's medical files, hidden in my car, and he definitely didn't know what my father had left, waiting in the greenhouse for me to find. The greenhouse door closed behind me, sealing me in humid warmth that smelled of earth and orchids. I had 10 minutes before Julian came looking, before he forced me to sign away everything my father had built. The greenhouse air wrapped around me, like a warm embrace. And I remembered my father's handwriting in his research notebook. When things are darkest, look for life deep underground. I'd found that notebook 3 months ago. While organizing his study, page after page of psychic cultivation notes. But one sentence had been different. Underlined twice, written in heavier ink. The cicada plant stood in the corner, where my father had positioned it 15 years ago. Massive, ancient. Its trunk thick as a tree, with dark green fronds spreading like a crown. I grabbed a small gardening shovel from the tool bench and knelt beside the cycad's root system. The first few inches came up easily. Loose potting soil, well aerated. Then the shovel hit something solid. I dug faster, pushing aside dirt with my hands, until metal gleamed in the overhead lights. A waterproof tin box sealed with rubber gaskets, buried 6 inches beneath the surface. My hands shook as I lifted it free. The seal released with a soft pop of escaping air. Inside, wrapped in protective cloth, a solid brass key with serial numbers etched into the metal, and a small digital tape recorder, no bigger than my palm. The living room had been methodically ransacked. Drawers pulled open, papers scattered. My mail spread across the coffee table. But this wasn't random burglary. Nothing valuable was missing. My laptop sat untouched on the desk. My grandmother's silver candlestick still stood on the mantel. Whoever broke in wasn't looking for electronics or jewelry. I pressed play on this tape recorder. My father's voice filled the greenhouse, recorded months ago, but sounding exactly as I remembered. Elena, if you're hearing this, then I'm dead. And you found what I left for you. Key opens box. 1847 at First National Bank on Michigan Avenue. Inside that box you'll find everything you need. Documentation, recordings, financial records. Everything Julian and the others thought they'd hidden. My throat tightened hearing his voice. Calm and methodical. even while planning for his own murder. I've known for 3 months that someone is poisoning me. The symptoms were too precise, too carefully managed. By the time I confirmed it, the damage to my heart was irreversible. So I built insurance instead. The safe deposit box contains everything. But Elena, you need to understand, Julian didn't work alone. There's a conspiracy involving people you trust. Be careful who you tell. Get the evidence first, then decide who to bring in. The psychedelic plant lives for hundreds of years, storing energy in silence, waiting for the exact right moment to bloom. My father had chosen his metaphor carefully. The recording ended with a soft click. I sat back on my heels, holding the brass key and recorder, understanding finally what my father had done. He'd spent his final months not fighting the poison, but documenting it, building a case, creating evidence that would survive his death. Footsteps crunched on the gravel path outside. I shoved the tin box back into the hole and quickly pushed soil over it, smoothing the surface. The brass key and recorder went into my jacket pocket as the greenhouse door handle rattled. Then I heard it, the sharp metallic snap of the deadbolt sliding home. From outside, Julian had locked me in. I ran to the door and pulled locked solid. The greenhouse had been built with security in mind. Heavy glass panels and steel frames. Now it was my cage. Through the frosted glass, I could see Julian's dark silhouette, moving toward the parking area where I'd left my truck. He was going to search my vehicle, looking for the medical files, probably, or property documents. The greenhouse temperature was already rising. Without ventilation, the space would become dangerously hot. Within 20 minutes, Julian knew that. He'd locked me in deliberately, giving himself time to search while I was trapped. I looked around frantically. The greenhouse had one exit, the locked door. But overhead, in the peaked roof, was a ventilation panel that opened to the attic space above. I grabbed a stepladder from the corner and climbed. The ventilation panel was held shut by a simple latch. I pulled the pliers from the tool bench and snapped the latch mechanism. The panel swung open into darkness. I pulled myself through, emerging into the mansion's attic, a dusty, unused space, filled with old furniture and storage boxes. A small window at the far end showed the parking area below. I crawled to the window and looked down. Julian was at my truck, the driver's door open, his upper body bent inside the cabin, searching the glove compartment, the center console, looking for anything I might have taken from the funeral home office. Meanwhile, the tin box I just excavated sat hidden in plain sight, back in the greenhouse, buried again between bags of organic fertilizer soil, less than 10 feet from where he'd been standing when he locked me in. The greenhouse glass creaked from rising heat. In 5 more minutes, I would have passed out from heat exhaustion. I crawled back through the attic, found the access stairs to the 2nd floor, and slipped down through the darkened mansion. Julian was still outside. I could hear him slamming truck doors, his search growing desperate. I slipped out the front entrance and ran. By the time I reached my truck, Julian having already searched and abandoned it, he was back in the greenhouse, probably just discovering the broken ventilation panel and realizing I'd escaped. I started the engine and drove away, the brass key and tape recorder pressing against my ribs like promises. Julian had no idea what I'd found. He thought he'd trapped me, thought he'd bought himself time to search for evidence I didn't have. But I had everything now. My father's insurance policy, his recorded voice explaining the conspiracy, a key to a bank vault containing proof of everything Julian had done. The tin box sat buried in the greenhouse soil, right where Julian had been standing, completely invisible, unless you knew to look. beneath the cycad's ancient roots. And by the time he thought to search there, I would already be at First National Bank opening box 1847, discovering what my father had left for me. I drove away from this mansion, with the brass key and tape recorder pressed against my ribs, watching my rearview mirror for Julian's headlights. The streets were empty at midnight, Chicago's January cold keeping everyone inside. My apartment building's parking garage was dark and silent. I pulled into my assigned spot and sat for a moment, fingers gripping the steering wheel, trying to process everything that had happened in the last 12 hours. My father's funeral, Victoria's medical files, the greenhouse, Julian's blackmail threat. I climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, instead of taking the elevator. Old laboratory habit making me cautious. The hallway fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, harsh and institutional. Then I saw my door. The lock hung at an odd angle, fresh scratches glinting under the harsh light. I knew before I even touched the handle that someone had been inside. I pushed the door open slowly. The apartment smelled wrong. Not my usual lavender diffuser, but something earthier. Masculine cologne mixed with something else. The muddy footprints tracked across my hardwood floor were unmistakable. Reddish clay still wet. The same distinctive soil from the mansion's rose garden. Someone had come here directly from the estate, tracking evidence across my living room. Like a confession. My hands went cold. While I'd been trapped in the greenhouse, while Julian had been searching my truck, someone else had been here, searching my apartment, going through my things. The living room had been methodically ransacked. Drawers pulled open, papers scattered. My mail spread across the coffee table. But this wasn't random burglary. Nothing valuable was missing. My laptop sat untouched on the desk. My grandmother's silver candlesticks still stood on the mantel. Whoever broke in wasn't looking for electronics or jewelry. They were looking for documents, evidence. The medical files Victoria had given me. I should call the police. A normal person would dial 911 right now. Report the break-in. File a report. But if I called the police, Julian would know I was suspicious. He'd know I'd found something worth protecting. I'd lose the advantage of surprise. I moved through the apartment, carefully cataloguing the damage. Kitchen drawers open. Utility drawer completely emptied onto the counter. Bedroom closet disturbed. Boxes pulled down from the top shelf. Bathroom medicine cabinet standing open. Then I heard it. A soft scrape of metal against concrete. From the balcony. I froze. Someone was still here. I grabbed the cast iron skillet from the kitchen counter and moved silently toward the sliding glass door. The balcony was dark, but I could see a silhouette against the night sky. A man's shape bent low, one leg already over the railing. He was trying to escape. I hit the light switch. The balcony flooded with brightness, and the man jerked backward, his face illuminated for just a moment, before he scrambled over the railing. Warren Mercer. Warren Mercer, 60. Julian's father was a gambling addict, whose debts hung over our marriage like a noose. I'd met him maybe 10 times in 5 years. Always at awkward family dinners, where he'd asked Julian for money. Always promising. This was the last time. Arthur had bailed him out twice. Both times extracting promises that Warren would stay away from the casinos. And now he was breaking into my apartment. I ran to the balcony edge watching Warren, to the 2nd floor balcony below, then scrambled down the exterior stairs. With surprising agility for a 60-year-old. Within seconds, he'd disappeared into the darkness of the parking garage, leaving only the muddy footprints as proof. He'd been here. How many of them were there? Julian at the mansion, Warren at my apartment. Chloe somewhere else, all moving in. Synchronized desperation. Like a pack of predators cornering prey. I went back inside and closed the balcony door, locking it. Even though locks clearly meant nothing to this family. My hands were shaking now. Adrenaline finally catching up with fear. The utility drawer, where I kept spare keys and important documents, had been completely emptied. They'd gone through everything. Old lease agreements, tax returns, insurance papers. Looking for property deeds probably. Or bank statements. Or anything that might tell them what I knew. But they hadn't found anything. Because I'd left the medical files hidden. In my truck's wheel well. I pulled the brass key. And tape recorder from my jacket. And stared at them. My father's insurance policy. Evidence of a conspiracy that apparently involved. Not just Julian and Chloe. But Julian's gambling addict father too. How deep did this go? How many people had been planning my father's murder? Arthur's recorded voice echoed in my memory. Julian didn't work alone. There's a conspiracy involving people you trust. I walked through my apartment again. Seeing it with new eyes. The scattered papers, the disturbed closet. The muddy footprints tracking from door to balcony. Showing Warren's panicked search pattern. When he'd heard my key in the lock. They were desperate. Desperately searching for something they thought I had. Desperately trying to find property. Documents or evidence. Or anything that would tell them whether I suspected. The truth, and that desperation made them dangerous. My apartment wasn't a home anymore. It was just another crime scene. In my father's murder investigation. I grabbed my laptop bag and started packing essentials. Clothes, toiletries. The brass key and tape recorder. Wrapped in a towel at the bottom of the bag. I couldn't stay here. Not with Warren knowing where I lived. With Julian knowing my routines. With the entire family. Apparently coordinating their search. I needed somewhere safe. Somewhere they wouldn't think to look. Somewhere I could listen to my father's tape recorder. And plan my next move. Without worrying about another break-in. But where my brothers lived at the estate. Uncle Orville's address was in the family directory. Any hotel would create a credit card trail. Julian could track. I stood in my violated apartment. Watching through the balcony door. As Warren Mercer's silhouette. Disappeared into the midnight streets of Lincoln Park. And understood with chilling clarity. That I had no safe place left. The tin box pressed against my ribs beneath my jacket. Evidence my father had hidden for me. And I realized Julian's family wouldn't stop searching. Until they found what I was hiding. They didn't just want my father's estate. They wanted to make sure. No one could stop them from taking it. I had maybe 6 hours. Before Julian realized. I'd found something in that greenhouse. 6 hours to get somewhere safe. Listen to the tape recorder. And figure out my next move. I grabbed my packed bag. And left the apartment with the broken lock. Heading for the one place. I thought they might not look. My father's laboratory at Vance Enterprises. Where I still had 24-hour access as an employee. I sat in my truck. In the parking garage with the engine running. Trying to decide where to go. The laboratory had 24-hour access. But Julian knew my routines. Julian's name lit up my phone screen at exactly 1 a.m. and I knew before answering. That the countdown clock had just started ticking. I let it ring 3 times, steadying my voice. Hello, I'm calling to inform you. That you have until noon today. That's 11 hours. To sign the emergency property management documents. No more delays, no more excuses. Julian, it's 1 a.m. I don't care what time it is. You ran away from the mansion tonight. You're clearly unstable, grief-stricken. Making poor decisions. But I'm giving you one final chance to do this. The easy way. I stayed silent, letting him talk. I possess your father's latest will. Drafted 4 days before his death. and legally certified by Victoria Sterling. It leaves controlling shares of Vance Enterprises to me. If you contest it, I'll immediately file criminal charges against your brother Mark for corporate fraud, using documents I've already prepared. My breath caught Mark. He was threatening Mark. Now Mark hasn't done anything wrong. Those documents are fabricated and you know it. Are they? Because I have Victoria certification on financial transfers. Mark allegedly authorized without board approval. I have emails with his digital signature. Enough documentation to tie him up in legal proceedings. For 3 years minimum. And you know, Mark can't afford that kind of legal battle. He was right. Mark had 2 kids, a mortgage, no liquid savings. A fraud investigation would destroy him. Even if he was eventually cleared. You're going to meet me at Vernon Sterling's office. At noon, Julian said. You're going to sign the emergency authorization. Then you're going to disappear back into your quiet little laboratory job. And stop asking questions. Do that and Mark stays safe. Refuse and I file charges before end of business today. You're blackmailing me. I'm giving you a choice. There's a difference. He paused. 11 hours, Elena. Noon at Vernon's office. Don't be late. The call ended. I sat in the dark parking garage, hands shaking. 11 hours, the same amount of time it takes thallium to complete one full cycle through the human bloodstream. Julian had weaponized my entire family, turning Mark into a hostage. And he'd done it with the same precision. He'd used to poison my father. Methodical, legal. Impossible. To fight without destroying the people I loved. Unless I had evidence stronger than his fabricated documents. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the tin box. Inside, the brass key gleamed dull gold. And beside it, the small digital tape recorder my father had left for me. I drove back to my apartment, broken lock. And all because I needed walls around me to listen to whatever my father had recorded. If Julian's people were watching, let them see me return home. Defeated inside, I went to the bathroom, closed the door, and turned on the shower. The running water would mask any audio. If someone had planted listening devices during Warren's break-in, I sat on the closed toilet lid and pressed play. My father's voice filled the small bathroom. Clear and steady. Elena, if you're hearing this, then I'm gone. I've documented everyone. Julian Mercer, Chloe Vance, Warren Mercer, Victoria Sterling. Each played their role. Julian orchestrated. Chloe provided access. Warren searched for estate documents. Victoria certified false reports. They thought they were being careful. They were wrong. The recording paused. This recorder contains 2 files. File 1 is this introduction. File 2 is a conversation I recorded 3 months ago. Listen to File 2. You'll understand why I had to let this play out. Instead of stopping it early, I pressed the button for File 2 static. Then voices, my father's voice and Julian's. In what sounded like the mansion study. Julian, I need to ask you directly. Do you know what kind of herbs are being mixed into my water every morning? Silence. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Then Julian's voice, carefully controlled. Dad, just drink it. Normally the herbs are good for your heart. Are they? Because I've been feeling worse, not better. The symptoms don't match what these herbs are supposed to do. You're overthinking it. Elena measures them precisely. She's a laboratory technician. She knows what she's doing. That's what worries me. Elena would never give me something harmful. Which means, either she doesn't know what she's really giving me, or someone told her. It was something other than what it actually is. Another pause, shorter this time. Dad, you're being paranoid. The stress of running the company is affecting your judgment. Maybe you should consider stepping down. Letting me take over operations. There it is, my father's voice said quietly. That's what this is really about. The recording ended. I sat in the bathroom with steam from the shower, hogging the mirror. My father had known. 3 months before his death. He'd known Julian was poisoning him. And he'd recorded Julian's response. My father's voice echoed in the small bathroom. Steady and calm. Speaking to me from 3 months before his death. Like he'd known I'd be sitting here at 2 a.m. listening to evidence of his murder. A chemist understands that silence. It was the exact moment a reaction occurs. The hesitation before a lie solidifies. My father had trapped him on tape. And that 3-second pause was the proof I needed. I had the recording. I had the brass key. But I had less than 11 hours to use them. Without destroying Mark. And I needed someone who understood. The legal battlefield. Julian had created. I arrived at Vernon Sterling's law office at 6:00 in the morning with one question burning in my. Could I trust the only ally I had left? Or had he been compromised? 6 months ago when Julian made his move. The building was dark. Except for Vernon's 3rd-floor suite. He'd told me to come early before his secretary arrived. Before anyone could see us meeting. That alone made my stomach tighten. Vernon opened the door himself. Looking like he hadn't slept. His silver hair was uncombed, his shirt wrinkled. "Elena," he said, stepping aside to let me in. "You look like you've been up all night." "I have." I didn't sit down. Julian called at 1 a.m. with an ultimatum. Noon today or he files fraud charges against Mark. Vernon's expression didn't change. Which told me he'd expected this. "Before I tell you what I found," I said, "I need to know something. Julian approached you 6 months ago. With a bribery offer. I need to know right now, did you take it? And what exactly did he ask you to do?" Vernon's face went grey. For a moment I thought he might deny it. But then he sighed heavily and moved to his desk. "He offered me $100,000 to delay probate proceedings and misplace certain trust documents." Vernon's voice was quiet. I refused immediately. Elena told him. If he ever contacted me about Arthur's estate again, I'd report him to the Bar Association. "Did you tell my father?" Vernon looked away. "No." "Why not?" "Because Arthur was dying. Because he had maybe 6 months left. And I didn't want to add that burden. Because I thought refusing was enough." He met my eyes. I was wrong. I should have told him, but I didn't. He remained silent once. Could I trust him not to remain silent again? But I also had no other choice. "Julian has a forged will," I said. "Certified by Victoria Sterling. It leaves everything to him. He's using it to threaten Mark." "I know," Vernon said. "Your father predicted Julian would try that." How do you measure trust? When you're standing in a law office at dawn, with a deadline counting down, and your only ally just admitted he kept secrets from the person who trusted him most. "Come with me," Vernon said. He led me down the hallway to the conference room. The door was already open, lights on. 2 people sat at the long table. My brother Mark looked up first. Mark Vance, 34. Had our father's build and our mother's dark eyes. He'd been working in Vance Enterprises finance department until Julian's fabricated fraud documents got him suspended 3 weeks ago. "Elena," Mark said, standing. "Vernon called me at 5:00 a.m. What's going on?" The woman beside him rose as well. Diana Thorne, 40, had steel-grey eyes. The kind of observant stillness I recognized from my own laboratory work. Someone who noticed everything and showed nothing. "Diana Thorne," Vernon said. "Private investigator. Your father hired her 3 months before he died." Diana extended her hand. "Arthur asked me to document everything. Financial transfers, communications, meetings. I've been tracking Julian's conspiracy since October." I shook her hand, my mind racing. My father had assembled a team. Vernon, Diana, probably others I didn't know about yet. Sit down, Elena, Vernon said. What I'm about to tell you will change everything. We sat. Vernon pulled a leather folder from his briefcase and spread documents across the conference table. 6 months ago, Vernon said. The week after Julian's bribery attempt, Arthur and I restructured his entire estate. We created an irrevocable blind trust. What does that mean? I asked. Mark answered, his finance background kicking in. It means once assets go into the trust, they're no longer the grantor's personal property. They legally belong to the trust itself. Exactly, Vernon said. Your father transferred everything. 6 months before his death. The $75 million cash reserve. All Vance Enterprises controlling shares. Every piece of real estate. All of it went into the trust. The words hung in the air like suspended particles, waiting to precipitate. That means, I said slowly, Julian's forged will is worthless. Because my father didn't own those assets when he died. The trust did. Precisely, Vernon said. Julian can wave that forged will around all he wants. It's meaningless. You can't inherit what the deceased didn't own. Diana leaned forward. Arthur knew Julian would try to forge estate documents. So he made sure there was nothing to forge. He stripped the estate bare. 6 months before Julian expected him to die. My father had seen Julian's bribery attempt as the starting gun. Not a threat. It told him exactly when to pull the trigger on. A legal trap so perfect that Julian never even knew he was already defeated. But there's one more piece, Vernon said. The trust needs to be activated. Your father designated an executor. The only person who can access the trust assets and distribute them according to his wishes. He looked at me. He said. You're the executor. But you need the brass safe deposit key to activate it. Arthur said. You'd know where to find it when the time came. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the key I'd found in the greenhouse. Wrapped in cloth. It gleamed dull gold on the conference table. Mark's eyes widened. You already have it. From the greenhouse, I said, last night. Vernon picked up the key, examining the serial numbers. Box 1847, First National Bank. Inside that box is the trust activation document. With your signature as executor, the trust becomes active and all assets transfer. According to Arthur's wishes. Which are, I asked. Everything to you, Vernon said. The entire $75 million. Controlling shares, full ownership. He wanted to make sure Julian couldn't touch any of it. And he wanted to make sure you had the resources to fight back. The brass key in my hand suddenly felt heavier. It wasn't just evidence. It was the activation mechanism for everything Arthur had protected. My father had won this war. 6 months before, Julian poisoned his final cup of water. He'd stripped Julian's forged will of all legal power before it was even written. And the entire conspiracy, the poisoning, the threats, the midnight break ins, had been pointless from the start. Julian just didn't know it yet. But I still had 5 hours and 28 minutes before noon. And Julian would destroy Mark if I didn't play this perfectly. I left Vernon's office with the brass key in my pocket. And a strategic advantage Julian didn't know I had. But I still had 6 hours until his noon deadline. And I needed to see the forged will with my own eyes. I walked into my husband's 40th floor CFO office at 9 a.m. knowing something he didn't. The forged will he was about to show me was legally worthless. And I just needed to see the forgery with my own eyes. Julian's office occupied the corner of Vance Enterprises corporate building. All glass walls and downtown Chicago skyline. He sat behind an enormous mahogany desk that had belonged to my father until 3 weeks ago. Elena, he said, standing with false warmth. I'm glad you decided to be reasonable. Show me the will, I said. He pulled a leather folder from his desk drawer and slid it across to me. Your father's final will dated January 11th. Just 4 days before his death. Witnessed and certified by Victoria Sterling. It supersedes all previous estate documents. I open the folder. The document looked professionally prepared. Watermarked paper, proper legal formatting. Multiple pages of dense text. Disposing of my father's estate. Julian's name appeared throughout. Designated as primary beneficiary. For controlling shares of Vance Enterprises. And at the bottom of page 7 my father's signature. I lifted the page toward the window, angling it to catch the morning light. The signature gleamed with that telltale petroleum sheen. Cheap gel ink from a ballpoint pen. My father's fountain pen ink had a matte carbon black finish, with microscopic mica particles. For anti-forgery protection. I'd seen him sign legal documents 100 times in his study. Always using the same Mont Blanc pen with custom formulated ink. This signature was a photocopy traced over with gel ink. Probably done by Victoria. Using a light table. Good enough to fool a casual observer. Not good enough to fool someone with laboratory training and chemical composition. Ink analysis is forensic chemistry. Oil-based gel ink oxidizes differently than water-based fountain pen ink. Leaves different reflectivity patterns. Bonds to paper fibers. With entirely different molecular structures. But I revealed nothing. This gives you everything I said aloud. Playing the defeated wife Julian expected to see. Not everything Julian corrected. The estate goes through probate. But this will establishes my claim as primary beneficiary. Combined with the emergency authorization you're about to sign. I'll have operational control immediately. He pushed another document across the desk. The authorization papers he'd threatened me with. At 1 a.m. I need time to process this. I said, forcing my voice to shake. Can I have until this evening to review the authorization papers? Julian's eyes narrowed. You have until noon, that was the deal, please. I said, letting real exhaustion show. Just a few more hours. I need to talk to Mark. Make sure he understands. This is the only way to protect him. Julian studied me, weighing whether this was capitulation or resistance. Then he nodded. 4 p.m. he said. That's as late as I'm willing to go. Vernon's office 4 o'clock. If you're not there with your signature, I file charges against Mark. At 4:01, I left the building. With the forged will photographed on my phone. And Julian's revised deadline ringing in my ears. 4 hours instead of 6. He was tightening the noose. My truck was parked 3 blocks away in a surface lot. The low fuel light glowed orange on the dashboard. As I started the engine, I'd driven straight from my apartment to Vernon's office, to the corporate building. Maybe 10 miles total, but apparently enough to drop the tank below empty. I pulled into the first gas station I saw. The card reader beeped twice when I swiped declined. Declined. I tried again, hands starting to shake, still declined. I pulled out my phone and opened my mobile banking app. Checking account $0, savings account $0. A banner notification sat at the top of the screen. Co-ownership withdrawal. January 6:47 a.m. Amount $12,000. New balance $0. 6:47 a.m. While I was sitting in Vernon's conference room, learning about the irrevocable trust, Julian had been draining every dollar I owned. That joint account from 5 years ago. The one I'd forgotten about. When we merged our finances. We'd opened it when we first married. Back when I still believed Julian cared about something beyond my father's company. I'd stopped using it years ago. But legally Julian still had co-ownership rights. Full withdrawal authority. And he'd use those rights to financially strangle me. I sat in my truck at the gas pump, watching other customers fill their tanks, pay with cards that actually worked, drive away to lives where their bank accounts weren't controlled by murderers. How do you fight a legal battle when your opponent controls your bank account? Your home address is compromised, and you have 6 hours before he destroys your brother's life. I checked my pockets. $17 in cash from my wallet. The brass key worth $75 million. My father's tape recorder with evidence of conspiracy. My phone with photos of the forged will. But $0 in the bank. A quarter tank of gas. And 4 hours until Julian's revised deadline. But he'd made one critical error. I still had access to my laboratory. At Vance Enterprises. I was still an employee. Julian hadn't fired me yet. Probably because that would look suspicious. So soon after my father's death. And my laboratory had something Julian's money couldn't touch. Chemicals, equipment and knowledge. I put the truck in gear. And drove toward Vance Enterprises. On my remaining fuel. The brass key pressing against my ribs like a promise. With my accounts drained. And the fuel light glowing glare orange. Julian thought he had completely paralyzed me. He forgot one thing. He could freeze my bank accounts. But he couldn't freeze my mind or strip away my medical knowledge. I had $0 and 4 hours to build the one weapon. Julian couldn't buy or understand chemistry. I arrived at the Water and Food Safety Testing Laboratory at 1 p.m. with exactly $0 in my bank account. And one chemical weapon left. To build a weapon Julian couldn't see, couldn't buy, and wouldn't understand until it was too late. The laboratory was quiet on a weekday afternoon. Most technicians out conducting field tests. I found Saskia Whitaker at her station, running pH analysis on water samples from the Northside distribution system. Saskia Whitaker, my 25-year-old lab assistant, had worked under me for 2 years. She was brilliant with extractions, meticulous with measurements, and smart enough not to ask questions. When I needed something off the books, Saskia, I said quietly, I need you to prepare something for me. Not logged in the system, just between us. She looked up from her microscope, reading my expression. What do you need? Purple cabbage pH indicator. Naturally extracted anthocyanins. As pure as you can get it. Concentrated. Enough to coat the inside of a water glass. With an invisible layer. Her eyebrows rose slightly. That's old school chemistry. Most people use synthetic indicators now. I need natural. And I need it to be undetectable until it reacts. Saskia studied me for a moment, then nodded. How much? Enough for 2 glasses, maybe 30 milliliters. Give me 40 minutes. I watched her work my laboratory. Training, appreciating the precision. Purple cabbage extract. Contains anthocyanins, organic compounds that shift molecular structure based on pH. Acting as natural litmus paper. That's been used in chemistry for centuries. Before synthetic indicators existed. The chemistry was simple but elegant. Anthocyanins are purple in neutral pH environments. Add them to something acidic pH below 60, and they turn pink or red. Add them to something basic pH above 80, and they turn yellow or green. Most heavy sedatives have low pH. When dissolved in water, they create an acidic solution. Here's how it works. I explained. As Saskia purified the extract through a filter, you apply it as an invisible layer on the inside of a glass. When someone pours water in, nothing happens. Water is neutral pH. But if someone adds anything acidic, like a sedative with pH below 60, the entire liquid turns fluorescent yellow. Chemistry doesn't lie. Saskia handed me a small amber bottle. 35 milliliters, high concentration. Apply it thin with a cotton swab, let it dry completely. It'll be invisible until reaction. Thank you, I said. Elena. She said quietly. I don't know what this is for, but be careful. I left the laboratory with the pH indicator in my pocket and drove to a quiet cafe. 3 blocks from the police station. Dominic Hampton was already there, sitting in a back booth, with coffee going cold in front of him. Dominic Hampton, 45, was a police inspector I'd met exactly once at my father's 60th birthday party 5 years ago. Arthur had introduced him as his old college friend, someone who'd chosen public service over corporate law. Now he looked at me with the same careful assessment I'd seen in Vernon's eyes. Your father called me 2 months before he died, Dominic said without preamble. Asked me to meet him at his office. Not the mansion, the corporate office. Very specific about that. What did he want? Dominic pulled a sealed envelope from his jacket. Official looking, stamped with legal seals. My father's handwriting across the front. Open. Only upon issuance of arrest warrant for Julian Mercer. He left this with very specific instructions. Dominic said, told me that if anything happened to him, if he died within the next year, I should watch for signs of foul play. Said that if I ever had probable cause to arrest Julian Mercer, I should open this envelope first. What's inside? I can't open it without the arrest warrant. Legal chain of custody. But Arthur told me it contains full legal names and documentation of everyone involved in what he called the conspiracy. Julian Mercer, Chloe Vance, Warren Mercer, Victoria Sterling. The same names on the tape recorder. My father had documented everything twice, 3 times, building redundant systems to ensure justice survived his death. I need your help, I said. Tonight Julian is planning something, and I have evidence. He's going to attempt another crime. Dominic leaned forward. What kind of evidence? The kind that will give you probable cause for that arrest warrant. I explained the plan. Julian's deadline, the apartment meeting, the pH indicator. That would expose any sedative he tried to slip into my drink. A hidden camera Diana was installing. The tape recorder, proving Julian knew about the poisoning months before my father died. If he drugged that water, I said, you'll have him on camera committing felony assault. That's your probable cause. That's when you open the envelope. Dominic was quiet for a long moment. Your father was my friend, he finally said. Best man at my wedding. He asked me for one favor in 30 years of friendship. To wait for this moment and be ready to move. When you gave me the signal. Will you do it? What time? 7 p.m. my apartment. I'll have Diana wire the space. You position officers outside. The moment that water turns yellow you come in. Dominic nodded slowly. I'll need to see the camera feed in real time. And I'll need you to say a specific code word when you want us to enter. Something that won't sound suspicious in conversation. Arthur, I said. The code word is Arthur. My father had met with a police inspector 2 months before his death, knowing he wouldn't survive long enough to see justice. Himself trusting me to finish what he'd started. I'll have a team ready, Dominic said. But Elena, if this goes wrong, if Julian realizes it's a trap, he won't, I said. Because I'm going to call him right now and give him exactly what he wants. A defeated wife begging to sign his papers. Arthur had prepared everything, down to the smallest detail. The brass key, the tape recorder, the irrevocable trust, Diana's investigation, and now a sealed police envelope containing every conspirator's name. He'd built a legal machine so perfect that all I had to do was pull the trigger. But first I had to survive the next 4 hours and get Julian to walk into my apartment with that vial of sedatives in his pocket. I had one more person to call before Julian's deadline hit. Julian himself. I left the cafe with Dominic's promise of And one final task lured Julian into the trap. The parking lot stretched empty under violet twilight. My car a metal cocoon, shielding me from everything, except the phone in my trembling hands, and the performance I was about to deliver. I sat in the driver's seat with the engine off, watching the January sunset behind Chicago skyline. In 2 hours Julian would walk into my apartment, expecting a defeated wife signing away her future. But first I had to convince him that defeat was real. I adjusted the rear-view mirror to watch my own face. Practiced letting my voice crack. Tried different levels of exhaustion. Different pitches of desperation. Arthur had loved theatre. When I was 12, he'd taken me to see performances at the Goodman Theatre, explaining afterward how good actors found truth in lies. The best performances, he'd said, use real emotions for fake situations. That's what makes them believable. I thought about my father's funeral. The medical files Victoria had thrust at me. The tin box buried beneath the cicada plant. My bank account showing $0 this morning. The tears came easily. Real tears, real exhaustion, real grief. I just had to redirect them into fake surrender. The performance didn't require much acting. The exhaustion in my voice would be real. The tears genuine, the desperation authentic. I was simply channeling true emotion into a false narrative, making the lie undetectable, because the feelings underneath were completely honest. I rehearsed the key phrases mentally. I can't do this anymore. Pause for breath. You win, let voice break there. Just let me leave with something. Timing was everything. Pauses that sounded like shame. Voice breaks that suggested defeat rather than rage. At 6:34 p.m. I dialed Julian's number. He answered on the second ring. Elena. I let my voice crack immediately. Julian, I can't keep fighting. You were right, I was never part of this world. Silence on the other end, calculating silence. What do you want Elena to sign the papers tonight? I paused, letting real tears make my voice shake. But I need 12,000. My savings, you can keep everything else. The company, the estate, all of it. Just give me back what was mine. More silence. I could almost hear him weighing whether this was genuine or a trap. Why tonight, he finally asked. Because I can't spend one more night in this apartment, surrounded by his things. The tears were real now, grief mixing with performance. Because every hour I stay here I lose more of myself. Because you've already won and I just want it over. Through the windshield. Street lights flickered on one by one. Across the parking lot. Each sodium vapor bulb casting orange pools that reminded me of stage lights. Of performances Arthur had taken me to as a child. Of the difference between authentic emotion and manufactured display. A difference I was about to erase. 7 o'clock, Julian said. And I could hear the satisfaction bleeding through his fake concern. Your apartment, I'll bring the cash. Thank you, I whispered. Voice calibrated to sound broken rather than strategic. Elena, he said. Voice softening in a way that made my skin crawl. This is the right decision. Your father would want you to move on, start fresh. Not destroy yourself fighting battles you can't win. I hung up before I could say something. That would shatter the performance. The call had lasted 2 minutes and 47 seconds. Long enough to convince him. Short enough to sound like genuine emotional collapse. Rather than calculated strategy. I sat in the darkening car, processing what had just happened. Julian had agreed before I even finished explaining. Before asking where I'd get the money to pay him back. Before questioning why I wanted to meet tonight instead of tomorrow. Before showing any of the suspicion a careful person would display. He'd been waiting for this. Anticipating my surrender. Maybe even engineering the circumstances to break me faster. The bank account drainage, the deadline pressure. The threat against Mark. All of it designed to create exactly this moment. The defeated wife begging for scraps. And he'd agreed so quickly. Because this was the outcome he'd been savoring. All along I started the engine. And began driving back toward my apartment. Mind already shifting to the next phase. Diana would be installing cameras. Dominic would be positioning officers. I needed to coat the inside of a water glass with Saskia's pH indicator. Stage the apartment to look like defeat rather than preparation. The phone screen showed 6:47 p.m. 13 minutes since the call ended. 73 minutes until Julian would arrive. Expecting a broken woman signing away her future. Walking instead into surveillance cameras. And a wife who'd learned revenge from a master strategist. Then my phone buzzed with a text message. Julian, I'll bring champagne. We should celebrate you finally seeing reason. I pulled over staring at the message champagne. He wasn't just coming to collect my signature. He was planning to celebrate to stay. To gloat over his victory. Like it was a corporate acquisition worth toasting. The message crystallized everything I'd suspected. During the phone call, Julian hadn't just anticipated my surrender. He'd been savoring the fantasy of it. The champagne meant he planned to luxuriate in my defeat. To watch me sign away my father's legacy, while he raised a glass to his own cleverness perfect. The longer he stayed, the more footage the cameras would capture. Every minute he spent celebrating was another minute of evidence. Every word of gloating was another nail in his legal coffin. Julian's arrogance, which had seemed like an obstacle, had just transformed into a strategic advantage. I texted back, okay, one word, defeated, compliant. Then I drove toward my apartment, where Diana Thorne would be waiting. With surveillance equipment. Where Dominic Hampton would be coordinating. Plainclothes officers in the building. Where a water glass coated with invisible pH indicator sat ready to turn fluorescent yellow. The moment Julian added whatever sedative he'd brought. In that vial. 71 minutes until Julian walked into the trap. Arthur had spent 6 months building. 71 minutes until I pulled the trigger on a legal machine. So perfect that my father had designed it to work. Even after his death, I had one more preparation to make. Before Julian arrived. Applying the pH indicator to the glass. And positioning it exactly where he'd see it. Exactly where he'd think to use it. Exactly where the cameras would capture. Every frame of him poisoning my water the same way he'd poisoned my father's. The parking lot disappeared in my rear view mirror. Replaced by city streets. Leading back to the apartment where this would all end. I drove back to my apartment. With 71 minutes. To prepare the trap that would end this. Diana Thorne's knock came at exactly 5:00 p.m. Her leather equipment bag. Disguised as an oversized purse. Her expression all business beneath a smile. Designed for hallway cameras. Surveillance specialist, she said quietly. Slipping inside. Vernon said, you need everything documented. She moved through my apartment. With the efficiency of someone who'd wired 100 traps. Before breakfast. Within 10 minutes she'd identified the perfect angle. A decorative candle holder on my bookshelf. With direct line of sight to the coffee table. And front door. The lens is smaller than a shirt button. Diana said. Showing me a device that looked like a watch battery. He'll never see it but will capture everything. Audio-video timestamp. She installed the camera. Then pulled out a tablet showing the live feed. The image was crystal clear. Capturing the entire living room in high definition. One more thing. Diana said this camera captures infrared spectrum. If he introduces any powder or liquid, anything at all, it'll show up on enhanced footage as glowing evidence. Even if it's invisible to the naked eye. My breath caught. Even if Julian was careful. Even if he used something colorless and odorless. The infrared spectrum would expose it. I set up a secure Live stream from my own network profile. Granting Dominic's team. Eyes inside the room. Legally as the tenant it was my right to record. My phone buzzed. Dominant calling officers positioned. His voice came through Diana's speakerphone. 2 in the lobby as maintenance workers. 1 in the stairwell as a tenant coming home late. Say the word Arthur. And we're through that door in 12 seconds. What if he searches the apartment? I asked. Then we have him on camera conducting an illegal search. Diana said, proving premeditation. Either way we win. She handed me a wireless earpiece smaller than a pill. Keep this in, we'll hear everything. If something goes wrong. Before you can say the code word. Just touch your left ear twice. That's the panic signal. I practice the motion, touch left ear twice. The water glass. I said. Pulling out the small bottle Saskia had prepared. I need to coat it now. Diana watched. As I used a cotton swab to apply the invisible pH indicator to the inside of a plain drinking glass. The purple cabbage extract dried clear, leaving no trace. What does it detect? Diana asked. Acidic compounds. If he adds anything with pH below 60. Most heavy sedatives. The water turns fluorescent yellow. Diana smiled grimly. Your father taught you well. Diana and Dominic left at 6:47 p.m., 13 minutes before Julian's arrival. And the apartment transformed. From war room to stage set. Every object a prop. Every word I would speak a scripted line. Except the cameras would capture truth. Instead of performance. I positioned the coated water glass on the coffee table. Between the couch and the armchair. Casual, natural. Where someone might offer a guest a drink. At exactly 7:00 p.m. Julian knocked. I opened the door. To find him holding a champagne bottle in one hand. And a leather folder in the other. An envelope. Thick with cash peeked from his jacket pocket. Elena. He said, stepping inside without waiting for invitation. I told you this would end with you seeing reason. Arthur raised you smarter than I thought you'd act. I kept my voice carefully, defeated. You were right. I don't belong in his world. I just want my life back. Julian set the champagne on the kitchen counter. And moved to the coffee table. Spreading out the authorization forms. Like he owned the place. Which I suppose he believed he did. Sign the authorization forms first. He said, pulling a pen from his pocket. Then we'll count out your 12,000. And toast to your fresh start. I sat on the couch playing the exhausted widow. Can I get you coffee? Water? Water's fine, Julian said. Barely glancing up from the papers. I went to the kitchen. Filled the treated glass from the tap. And brought it back to the coffee table. Set it down between us. Close enough for him to reach. Far enough to look natural. Julian studied the forms, pointing to signature lines. These authorized temporary estate management. During probate. Standard procedure your lawyer can verify. I don't have a lawyer anymore, I said quietly. Can't afford one. Julian's smile was pure satisfaction. Yes, I noticed you had some banking issues this morning. Joint account withdrawals are perfectly legal when both parties have co-ownership rights. You took everything. I took what was legally mine to take. Consider it motivation to cooperate. He leaned back, studying me with the same expression I'd seen when he closed corporate deals. Calculating, confident. Already counting his victory. You look exhausted, he said. When's the last time you slept? I keep dreaming about the funeral. I said, letting real grief make my voice crack. About signing those first papers. While he was still warm. Julian spread the authorization forms across my coffee table. Like a conquering general displaying surrender terms. Each page a territory he believed already ceded. Each signature line a border he'd redrawn in his favor. While I was simply waiting for him to cross. One final line on camera. Poor Elena, Julian said, voice dripping false sympathy. This has been so hard on you. The stress, the grief. Trying to fight battles you can't win. His eyes drifted to the water glass, then back to me. Then to the glass again. You know, he said slowly. Before you sign these, maybe you should drink some water. You're shaking. I need you steady enough to understand what you're agreeing to. His hand moved towards his inner jacket pocket. With practiced casualness. Not rushed, not obvious. Just a man reaching for something he'd brought with him. Julian's smile stayed perfectly calibrated. As his fingers slipped inside his jacket. Eyes never leaving the water glass. Positioned exactly where I had placed it. Between us on the coffee table. His hand emerged holding something small. A tiny glass vial no bigger than my thumb. His expression shifted to concern. So practiced it could only be premeditated. Actually, he said, I brought something that might help. Just a mild sedative, nothing strong. You're clearly anxious. And I want you calm when you sign these papers. Don't want you claiming duress later. Julian held the tiny vial between his fingers. Like it was medicine. Instead of evidence. You look like you're about to collapse. He said, voice dripping false concern. Drink some water before we start with the paperwork. I need you steady. Let me make coffee first. I said, standing on shaking legs that weren't entirely. Performance, I think, better with coffee. Fine, Julian said. Setting the vial on the coffee table. Next to the water glass. But drink that water, you're dehydrated, I can see it. I walked to the kitchen. My back to Julian. But my eyes on the chrome backsplash mirror. That reflected the living room behind me. The mirror's surface was slightly curved. Distorting the image. But I could see Julian clearly enough. I made a show of preparing coffee. Grinding beans, filling the carafe. Actions that would keep me occupied. And facing away. In the mirror's reflection. I watched Julian glance toward the kitchen doorway. Confirming I wasn't looking. Then his hand moved with practiced efficiency. He picked up the vial. Uncapped it with his thumb. And tipped it over the water glass. 3 clear drops fell into the water. Dissolving instantly without disturbing the surface. 3 drops, precise, measured. He'd done this before or planned it so thoroughly. The execution became muscle memory. Julian recapped the vial. And slipped it back into his jacket pocket. All in less than 5 seconds. His movements were practiced, efficient. Revealing this wasn't improvised desperation. He'd brought that vial. Intending to use it from the moment I'd called him. Surrendering. Take your time, Julian called toward the kitchen. These forms are dense. You'll want a clear head. Just adding cream, I said. Voice steady despite my racing heart. Be right there. I poured 2 cups of coffee. I had no intention of drinking. And carried them back to the living room. Set them on the coffee table. Next to the drugged water glass. Julian gestured to the authorization forms. Before we get into the details, drink some water. You're shaking. I need you. Lucid enough to understand what you're signing. I picked up the glass, feeling its weight in my palm. The water looked perfectly clear, perfectly normal. But I knew what was in it now. 3 drops of whatever sedative Julian had brought. Probably the same compound he'd used on my father. For 8 months. I lifted the glass toward the lamp on the side table. Tilting it as if checking for dust or imperfections. The transformation was instant and absolute. Under the lamplight. The water turned brilliant fluorescent yellow. The color of a highlighter. Of warning signs of chemical reactions. That couldn't be hidden or denied. The anthocyanin coating I'd applied. Reacting with the alkaline sedative Julian had added. Turning the entire glass into glowing chemical proof. Julian's face drained of all color. This water looks strange, I said calmly. Does it look strange to you, Julian? It's just the lighting. Julian said, but his voice had gone tight. The lamp drink it really. I held the glass higher, letting the fluorescent yellow glow brighten. Because this looks exactly like what happens when purple cabbage extract meets a base compound. Like a sedative, for instance. Julian stood abruptly. Put the glass down, Elena, you're being paranoid again. This is exactly why Arthur worried about your stability. Funny, I said, still holding the glowing glass. My father never worried about my stability. He worried about people poisoning him. And it turns out he was right to worry. Julian's hand moved toward his jacket pocket. Toward the vial. Then stopped as he calculated whether reaching for it would make things worse. What did you put in my water, Julian? The question hung in the air between us. Sharp and unavoidable. Julian's eyes darted from the yellow glass to my face, searching for any sign that I didn't understand. The full implications of what I was holding. Then his gaze moved upwards, sweeping across the bookshelf, the decorative items landing on the candle holder. His face went grey. He'd spotted the camera. I felt the wireless earpiece Diana had placed, pressing against my ear. Heard the faint static. That meant Dominic and his team were listening to every word, watching every frame, waiting for the code word. Arthur, if Julian moved toward me instead of the door. You're recording this, Julian said quietly. Not a question, a realization. I'm holding evidence, I corrected. Fluorescent yellow. Evidence of you attempting to drug me. The same way you drugged my father for 8 months. The same compound, probably the same plan. Julian's throat worked at his lawyer's mind, clearly running through options. Deny, deflect, attack, run. I don't know what you think you saw. I saw you, I interrupted, in the kitchen mirror. 3 drops from the vial in your jacket pocket. Precise, practiced like you'd done it before. Julian's eyes flicked to the kitchen, to the chrome backsplash, calculating whether the angle would have given me a clear view. His silence confirmed everything. The camera in that candle holder, I continued, has infrared capability. Even if the sedative had been invisible to the naked eye, the enhanced footage would show it, glowing like a beacon. And the water, turning yellow, is just confirmation of what the chemistry already proved. Julian took a step backward, his hand moving toward the door. Don't, I said quietly. There are police officers in the lobby and the stairwell. They've been watching this entire conversation. The only question now is whether you make this worse by running the fluorescent yellow glass hung between us. Like a verdict. The question hanging in the air with equal brightness. Julian's throat worked, his eyes darting from the glass to my face, to the bookshelf camera he'd finally spotted, calculating whether lies could still save him, or if the evidence glowing in my hand had already destroyed every exit. You set me up, Julian said, voice hollow. No, I replied. I gave you the opportunity to prove who you really are. You brought the vial. You added it to my water. You tried to drug me into signing away my father's estate. I just made sure there was proof when you did. Julian's hand was still moving toward the door. When I spoke the code word that would end this. Arthur, I said. Clearly Arthur would be proud of what I'm about to do. The code word hung in the air between us. I set the glowing yellow glass on the coffee table and reached for the bookshelf, my fingers closing around the small digital recorder. Arthur had left me 3 months before he died. What is that? Julian asked, voice tight. Evidence, I said. Pressing play. Arthur's voice filled the apartment, clear and measured despite being recorded months ago. Julian. About these herbs you recommended for my sleep issues. Did you research contraindications with my heart medication? Silence on the recording. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Then Julian's voice, younger, sounding carefully controlled. Dad, just drink it. Normally the herbs are good for your heart. Are they? Arthur's voice carried the faint amusement. He used when he'd already caught someone in a lie. Because I've been feeling worse, not better. And the symptoms don't match what these herbs are supposed to do. You're overthinking it. Elena measures them precisely. She's a laboratory technician. She knows what she's doing. That's what worries me, Arthur said on the recording. Elena would never give me something harmful. Which means either she doesn't know what she's really giving me, or someone told her. It was something other than what it actually is. Another pause on the recording. Dad, you're being paranoid. The stress of running the company is affecting your judgment. Maybe you should consider stepping down, letting me take over operations. That pause tells me everything I need to know. Arthur interrupted quietly. The recording ended with a soft click. Julian stood frozen in my living room, face drained of color. That recording proves nothing. Silence isn't evidence. I was thinking, processing. You were calculating whether admitting you knew would be worse than the silence, I said. Arthur knew it too. That's why he recorded every conversation with you. For 3 months. He documented everything, Julian. Every recommendation you made, every lie you told. Every step of your plan. Arthur's voice on the recording sounded exactly as I remembered. Measured, intelligent. The faint amusement he carried even in confrontation. And hearing it now felt like he was in the room delivering the verdict. Julian thought he'd escaped. Julian's hand moved toward the door again. Don't, I said. Just as heavy footsteps pounded in the hallway outside. The apartment door burst open. Dominic Hampton entered, first weapon drawn. 3 uniformed officers behind him. Julian Mercer, hands where I can see them. You're under arrest for attempted assault with a controlled substance. This is insane, Julian said, backing against the wall. She's delusional. I'm calling my lawyer. You can call them from the station, Dominic said. One officer moved forward with handcuffs, while another secured the apartment. Diana Thorne appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand showing the camera feed. She pulled an evidence bag from her kit and carefully sealed the fluorescent yellow water glass. Fluorescent marker confirms. Alkaline compound consistent with benzodiazepine. Sedatives, Diana said, labeling the bag. Combined with video footage and audio confession. You're done. Before I show you what was on that sealed list. Arthur left with police. I need to ask comment. Or if you think more family members are involved. Or B, if Julian acted with outsiders only. And add one reason why. Because what comes next changes everything. Please note the next part includes some fictionalized details, added to deepen the emotional impact. Though the core message is what matters. The handcuffs clicked shut around Julian's wrists. With a sound of absolute finality. You have the right to remain silent, the officer began. But Julian was already talking over him. Elena, listen to me. We can work this out. I'll sign over the company. I'll give you everything. Just don't do this. I'm not doing anything. I said quietly. You did this, you brought the vial. You drugged the water. You tried to steal my father's company. After murdering him for it. I just made sure there was proof. Dominic pulled a sealed envelope from his jacket. The one Arthur had left with him 2 months before his death. Your father gave me specific instructions. Dominic said, breaking the seal. Open this only when I had probable cause for arrest. He unfolded a typed document. Single-spaced Arthur's signature at the bottom. Arthur Vance. Documented 5 individuals involved in his murder. Conspiracy, Dominic read aloud. The East Wing becomes a water testing laboratory. I said, tracing the floor plan. Free services for communities that can't afford. Private labs lead testing, bacterial analysis. Chemical contamination screening. I'll run it myself. I have the certification and experience. Mark leaned forward. And the West Wing 12. private rooms for domestic violence survivors, secure facility legal advocacy support, temporary housing while they rebuild. Arthur said protect those with no protector. This is how. You're giving away a $75 million estate. Mark said quietly. I'm investing it in Arthur's actual values, instead of his family's pretensions. I pulled out a second document. Which brings me to Vance Enterprises. Vernon's eyes sharpened. I had Diana's team review Arthur's original succession documents. I continued. Where is she now? I asked, voice barely functioning. According to the estate manager's last report, Dominic said, checking his phone. She's at the mansion, alone with the children, while Mark is at a business conference in Detroit. My hands went numb. Chloe was at the mansion right now, alone with Mark's 10-year-old daughter and 8-year-old son. If Arthur's list was correct, if Chloe had helped murder him, then every second I stood in this apartment was a second those children spent with a conspirator who might realize Julian had been arrested. We need to go, I said. Now if any of the other conspirators warn her. Already coordinating, Dominic said, phone to his ear. Dispatch, I need units to the Vance Estate Mansion, 1847 Lakeshore Drive. Suspect Chloe Vance, conspiracy to commit murder. 2 minor children on premises. Approach with caution. He looked at me. How fast can you get there? 4 minutes, I said, already moving toward the door. Julian's voice followed me into the hallway. Elena, wait, Chloe doesn't know anything, she's innocent. Don't do this to Mark's family. But I was already running for the stairs. Dominic's footsteps behind me. The image of Chloe at the mansion with those children, burning in my mind. Like the fluorescent yellow water that had exposed Julian's poison. 4 minutes to reach the mansion. Before Chloe realized the trap had closed. I drove toward the mansion, with Dominic's voice in my ear, coordinating the arrest. But halfway there he told me to stand down. We've got this, he said. Let us do our job, you've done enough. So I turned around and went home, letting the professionals finish what Arthur had started. Chloe Vance was raising a champagne flute to her lips when Dominic Hampton's badge appeared in the mansion doorway, the crystal glass freezing halfway to her mouth as she processed what his presence meant. I wasn't there to see it happen. Dominic told me the details later, but I could picture it perfectly. Chloe in designer cocktail attire, celebrating some imagined victory, while the trap closed around her. Chloe Vance, Dominic said, stepping into the foyer, with 2 uniformed officers behind him. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and falsification of estate records. The champagne glass clattered to the marble floor, crystal shattering into 1,000 pieces. This is insane, Chloe said, backing away. I am Arthur's widow. You can't just throw me out of my own home. This isn't your home anymore, Chloe. Dominic said, the assets belong to an irrevocable trust. Anne, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder. Your access to this property is officially revoked. I don't know what you're talking about. Dominic pulled out Arthur's documentation. Arthur Vance documented you forging estate access logs to allow Julian Mercer unsupervised access to his private quarters 14 times between October and December. Each entry corresponds to dates. Arthur reported feeling unusually fatigued. Chloe's face went white. I was helping family. Julian needed financial records for the transition. Julian needed access to poison Arthur. Dominic interrupted. And you gave it to him. 14 times you signed him in. You disabled the security alerts. You created the access windows that allowed him to add compounds to Arthur's morning water. The champagne Chloe had been drinking cost $800 per bottle, imported from France for a private celebration. None of the arrested conspirators would attend. Luxury purchased with blood money. That would now fund her public defender. My children, Chloe said as the handcuffs clicked shut. My children will be destroyed by this. The scandal alone. Should have considered that. Before helping murder their grandfather. For inheritance money. Dominic said he told me later that Chloe cried all the way to the station. Not for Arthur. Not for what she'd done. Just for herself and the lifestyle she was losing. The next morning I woke to a text from Dominic. Victoria Sterling's disbarment hearing at 9 a.m. State Bar Association, you want to be there? I thought about it. Thought about watching Vernon's daughter face consequences. For forging the will that was supposed to steal everything Arthur had built. But I'd spent 18 days planning revenge. And actually watching it delivered felt hollow. Arthur wasn't there to see justice done. Watching Victoria lose her license wouldn't bring him back. I texted back, no, let me know how it goes. So I stayed home and watched the news coverage instead. The State Bar Disciplinary Committee met in a hearing room that looked like a courtroom. Without the jury box. Victoria Sterling sat at the respondents' table. In a grey suit. Her hands folded in front of her like she was praying. Vernon Sterling sat in the gallery. Not at the respondents' table with his daughter. In the public seating alone. The committee chair read the Ms. Sterling. Handwriting analysis confirms you forged Arthur Vance's signature on 3 estate modification documents, dated January 7th, January 11th and January 13th. How do you plead? I review the board's findings and ask for leniency. Victoria said, voice shaking. I was following client instructions from other family members. I was protecting the estate by forging documents. The chair interrupted. I thought I was executing Arthur's wishes. Without his signature, without his knowledge. Without proper legal authorization. Then Vernon was called to testify. Vernon walked to the witness stand. With the same measured dignity he'd carried for 20 years as Arthur's attorney. He didn't look at Victoria. Mr. Sterling, the chair said. You trained your daughter in estate law, correct? I did. For how many years? 15. In your professional opinion, would she have known that forging testamentary documents constitutes criminal fraud? Vernon's jaw tightened. Yes, my daughter knew exactly what she was doing. I taught her estate law for 15 years. She didn't make mistakes, she made choices. Criminal choices. Dad, please. Victoria's voice broke. Vernon didn't even glance in her direction. I have no daughter who forges wills. The committee deliberated for 11 minutes. Victoria Sterling. The chair said when they returned. Your license to practice law in Illinois is hereby permanently revoked. Effective immediately. You are barred from legal practice in any capacity. This committee also recommends criminal prosecution for forgery and fraud. Vernon stood and walked out of the hearing room without looking back. On the news footage, I watched Victoria's face crumble. Her father had just disowned her in front of the state bar, testifying against her to save himself. Because that's what Vernon did. He saved himself. Dominic called that evening. Final count, he said. 5 arrests: Julian Mercer, Warren Mercer, Chloe Vance, Victoria Sterling. Plus 1 confession from the medical examiner's assistant, who falsified Arthur's autopsy report. 5, I repeated, but Arthur's list had 6 names. Silence on the other end. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Vernon Sterling. Dominic finally said, we're still building that case. The way he said it, careful. Measured. Like he was choosing words a lawyer had approved. Made my stomach drop. He made a deal, I said, didn't he? Dominic's pause confirmed it. Vernon agreed to testify against the others. In exchange for immunity. The DA felt his testimony was more valuable than prosecuting him. Directly so he walks free for now. I hung up and sat in my apartment. As January darkness settled over Chicago. 5 people arrested, 4 confessions. Vernon Sterling. The man who'd orchestrated legal cover for the entire conspiracy. Walking free because he'd traded his daughter and his co-conspirators for immunity. But then I remembered something. Arthur had said on one of his recordings, "I've planned for every contingency." Vernon thought he'd won by making a deal. He thought testifying against the others would save him. But Arthur had spent 6 months building redundant systems. If Vernon made a deal, Arthur would have planned for that too. Vernon's immunity deal didn't surprise me. But I knew Arthur well enough to know he'd planned for exactly this outcome. The brass key felt heavier than it should in my palm as I walked through First National Bank's marble lobby toward the vault where Vernon Sterling waited, with the expression of a man attending his own execution. He stood when he saw me, hands clasped in front of him, like he was already in court. "Elena," he said. "Arthur's instructions said I should be present for this. Professional courtesy. You're here," I said, "because Arthur wanted you to watch everything you conspired for. Go to the person you tried to destroy." Vernon's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The bank manager led us into the vault room. A small, windowless space lined with steel deposit boxes. Box 1847 sat at eye level waiting. I inserted the brass key Arthur had buried beneath the cycad plant. The lock turned with a smooth click. Inside the box, a leather folder thick with documents, several evidence files bound with rubber bands, and a small digital recorder with a yellow sticky note. "Play this before she signs." I pulled out the evidence files first. The top folder had Vernon's name typed across the tab. Vernon's face drains of color. I opened it. 18 months of documented communications between Vernon and Julian. Emails discussing estate manipulation strategies. Text messages about timing probate delays. Meeting notes about forging succession documents. Every piece of legal cover Vernon had provided, documented in Arthur's meticulous handwriting. Arthur knew I said quietly the entire time. He knew I made a deal with the prosecutors. Vernon said, voice tight. Testimony against the others in exchange for immunity. In exchange for watching me inherit everything. You and your daughter forged documents to steal. I finished. Arthur's revenge wasn't prison for you. It was watching someone with integrity get what you tried to take. Through conspiracy. I set Vernon's evidence file aside and pulled out the trust documentation. Page after page of legal language. Establishing an irrevocable blind trust. Funded 6 months before Arthur's death. Naming me as sole beneficiary and executor. The trust contained everything. The entire cash reserve. All Vance Enterprises controlling shares. Every piece of real estate Arthur had owned. And because it had been established while Arthur was alive, Julian's forged will couldn't touch it. He did this 6 months ago. Vernon said, reading over my shoulder. Right after I refused Julian's bribery attempt. He did this, I corrected. Because your refusal told him. Julian was desperate enough to try corrupting his own attorney. That's when Arthur knew the conspiracy was real. I picked up the digital recorder and pressed play. Arthur's voice filled the small vault room. Warm and familiar despite being recorded months ago. Elena, if you're hearing this, then my murder went exactly as I predicted. And you executed the plan perfectly. The trust is structured so no one can contest it. No court can overturn it. No conspiracy can touch it. Vernon is there with you. Because I wanted him to witness this moment. Professional courtesy, I told him. Really, I wanted him to see what integrity looks like. Arthur's voice on the recording carried the same warmth he'd used, teaching me about water chemistry in the Vance Enterprises laboratory 18 months ago. Back when I'd believed I was just the technician, married to the founder's son. Before I understood, Arthur had been training me to inherit his empire. I failed Mark. Arthur's voice continued. I gave my family wealth without teaching them character. Privilege without responsibility. I watched the people around me fall to greed, and allowed Julian to manipulate them. But you, Elena, you had integrity before you ever met me. You chose laboratory work over corporate advancement. You measured water samples with the same precision you brought to every part of your life. You never asked for wealth or power or recognition. And that's why everything I built now belongs to you. The recording paused. Then Arthur's voice returned quieter. Use this power to protect people who have no one to protect them. That's the mission. That's why I chose you. That's my final request. The money is yours. The company is yours. The responsibility is yours. Don't waste it on revenge or luxury, or proving anything to anyone. Use it to be what I should have been. A protector of those who can't protect themselves. The recording ended. I stood in the vault, holding documents that made me owner of a multi-million-dollar trust and controlling shareholder of Vance Enterprises. Arthur's final words echoing in the steel-lined room. Vernon stood frozen against the vault wall, like a statue commemorating defeated greed, forced by Arthur's final strategy to serve as living witness to his own failure. A punishment more devastating than any prison sentence could deliver. The signature page. Vernon said quietly, pulling a document from the folder. You need to sign here to activate the trust. I took the pen he offered and signed my name on the line, where Arthur had marked with a yellow tab. Elena Vance, executor and sole beneficiary. The ink dried in seconds. Legally, transferring control of everything Arthur had built. It's done, Vernon said. You now control the trust and majority ownership of Vance Enterprises. Congratulations. But the word felt empty. This wasn't victory, this was responsibility. I looked at Vernon. Then at the evidence files Arthur had compiled. Then at the trust documents. That had just made me wealthier than I'd ever imagined. Arthur hadn't just given me money. He'd given me a mission that would define the rest of my life. Protect those who have no one to protect them. I repeated Arthur's words aloud. What? Vernon asked. Nothing, I said, gathering the documents. Just remembering what this is actually for. I walked out of First National Bank with legal ownership of everything Arthur had built. Vernon Sterling trailing behind me in defeated silence. But Arthur's final words on the recording echoed louder than the legal victory. Protect those who have no one to protect them. The question wasn't what to do with the money. The question was who Arthur expected me to protect with it, and whether I had the strength to use this inheritance the way he'd intended, rather than the way Julian had tried to steal it. Vernon's finger traced a paragraph buried on page 47 of the trust document, his voice carrying professional admiration, mixed with personal defeat. Do you understand what this clause does to Julian's company? The moment you sign. I studied the dense legal text. Cross-default provisions, guarantee recall mechanisms, corporate death sentences written in footnotes. Arthur embedded this 5 years ago. Vernon continued, turning to an exhibit tab. Every loan Julian took from Vance Enterprises after your marriage contains identical language. Section 12C, if guarantor, that's Arthur, transfers collateral assets to a third party, lender may demand immediate repayment of all outstanding obligations. The implications crystallized. Julian borrowed against Arthur's guarantee $23 million across 4 shell companies. Vernon's expression held grudging respect. For a dead man's chess game. The collateral was Arthur's personal stock portfolio, which you now own. The moment you signed that trust transfer, every loan became instantly due. Julian had built his corporate empire on borrowed money, using his father-in-law's wealth as foundation. Arthur had let him. Had encouraged it probably. Then built a demolition switch into the structure itself. He can't pay, I said, not without liquidating everything. And the cross-default clauses. Cascade 1. Loan default triggers acceleration on all the others. His venture capital fund, his real estate holdings. Even the consulting firm. Arthur didn't just plan your husband's arrest. He planned his financial execution. The scope of it staggered me. Arthur had constructed parallel justice systems. Criminal prosecution through Victoria's evidence. Financial destruction through corporate architecture. If the legal system failed, the market wouldn't. How long does Julian have? Vernon checked his phone. The automated notice went out. 90 seconds after you signed. His bank received formal demand at 9:47 a.m. He showed me the timestamp. By now his accounts are frozen. His creditors are circling. By Monday he'll be insolvent. I thought of Julian in holding. Still believing his lawyers would engineer his release. Still confident. His money would insulate him from consequences. He didn't know yet that the money was already gone. My phone buzzed. Victoria, turn on channel 7, she said without preamble. Vernon found the remote. The bank's conference room screen flickered to life. Mid-broadcast Bataille. Breaking news from Bellevue Heights, where Warren Mercer, father of detained suspect Julian Mercer, was taken into custody approximately 20 minutes ago. However, sources confirm this was a federal asset seizure. State marshals were executing a warrant for emergency fraudulent conveyance. The footage showed Warren on his front lawn, as federal officers cordoned off the property, stripping him of every asset he tried to hide. Arthur found the fraudulent transfer. Vernon said quietly. Warren helped Julian hide assets 2 years ago. Moved $6 million through shell companies. To avoid potential litigation. Arthur documented everything. Then sold the debt to a predatory recovery firm. 4 pennies on the dollar. The cruelty of it struck me. Warren wouldn't face criminal charges. He'd faced something worse. Civil judgment, asset seizure, bankruptcy proceedings. That would strip him methodically, rather than mercifully. The recovery firm has a 93% success rate. Vernon added. They'll take his house, his retirement accounts, his car. Everything on screen. Warren was being loaded into an unmarked vehicle, while reporters shouted questions. He looked smaller than I remembered from the funeral. Diminished. How many systems had Arthur manipulated? How many traps had he set? The news broadcast cut to courthouse footage. In related developments, attorneys for Julian Mercer filed a motion this morning, seeking psychiatric evaluation. The motion claims their client was not mentally competent at the time of the alleged crimes, citing a pattern of erratic behavior and potential cognitive impairment. Legal analysts suggest this represents a significant shift in defense strategy. Insanity defense, I said. Vernon nodded. Desperate but predictable. When the money is gone and the evidence is overwhelming, you attack your own credibility. Claim you weren't responsible for your actions. I watched Julian's lawyer read a prepared statement on the courthouse steps, arguing that his client's judgment had been impaired by undisclosed mental health struggles. The same man who'd spent months calculating exact doses of sedatives, who'd orchestrated elaborate financial schemes, who'd manipulated bank employees and pharmacy records with surgical precision. Will it work? I asked. Vernon's smile was grim. Arthur prepared for this too. The evidence files include psychiatric evaluations Julian underwent for his commercial pilot's license application 6 months ago. perfect cognitive function, perfect mental health. Submitted under penalty of perjury to the FAA. Of course Arthur had known. Had predicted every move, every defense. Every desperate pivot. He'd built countermeasures into foundations. I was still discovering. Victoria's voice crackled through my phone speaker. Elena, there's something else. The prosecutor just called. They found additional evidence in Julian's office. Safe correspondence between him and Vernon. About the poison itself. Chemical suppliers, dosage calculations, timing. Strategies. Vernon's looking at conspiracy charges. I glanced at Vernon. He'd gone pale, but his posture remained composed. Professional, a man who'd already accepted his fate. How long have you known? I asked him. That Arthur had the Vernon documents since the funeral. Victoria showed me excerpts. His voice stayed level. I'm cooperating. Because prison with dignity beats prison with additional obstruction charges. And because your father-in-law earned my cooperation. He gathered the trust documents, returning them to their folder with meticulous care. The syndicate is collapsing, Vernon said. Julian's bankrupt. Warren's being destroyed by creditors. Chloe's eviction hearing is Monday morning. She'll lose the house. Victoria and I are negotiating plea agreements. Arthur's plan is executing perfectly. He paused at the conference room door. But there's one element I can't find in his files. One move he left unscripted. Vernon's eyes met mine with sharp curiosity. What are you going to do with the company itself? The criminal conspiracy is solved. The financial revenge is complete. But you now control Vance Enterprises' 4,000 employees. 17 subsidiaries, a 70-year legacy. That decision is yours alone. The question hung in the air as Vernon left. Through the window, I could see the Vance Enterprises tower, dominating the skyline. Arthur's name in steel letters across the top. Arthur had orchestrated everything else. But this final move, this choice about legacy and power and purpose, he'd left to me. I had one move left that Arthur hadn't scripted for me, and everyone was waiting to see what the woman, with integrity, would do with a weapon designed for revenge. The decision about Vance Enterprises could wait. The decision about Chloe Vance couldn't. The process server found Chloe in the mansion's sunroom. At 9 a.m. On January, still wearing silk pajamas. That cost more than the server's monthly rent. Her face transforming. As she read the 30-day eviction notice. I wasn't there. I watched from my apartment. Via text updates from Patricia Hollis, the estate manager who'd worked for Arthur 12 years and had no loyalty to his murderers. Patricia's process server delivered eviction notice, Mrs. Vance is threatening legal action should I engage. I typed she has no leverage. Proceed as planned. The notice was precise. Chloe's land use rights terminated upon conviction. 30 days to vacate or face trespassing charges. Patricia's update included a photo. Chloe surrounded by designer luggage. Clothes spilling from suitcases. Face blotchy from crying. This is my home, Chloe had told the server. My children grew up here. You can't just. You're a convicted felon who conspired to murder the property owner. The server replied. You're lucky it's eviction and not trespassing charges. I stared at the photo, waiting for satisfaction. That never came. Chloe was losing everything: the mansion, the status, the Vance name that had elevated her from the working class background she'd spent 15 years escaping. That detail emerged during plea negotiations. Chloe Martinez had married my father Arthur Vance 12 years ago to escape a studio apartment in Bridgeport and insurance claims processing. She'd transformed into Chloe Vance, mistress of the estate, permanent resident of a world where money solved problems. Arthur's murder wasn't greed for her, it was terror. Terror of returning to instability, of losing security, of everyone discovering she'd come from nothing. She'd chosen victimization over protection, conspiracy over integrity. Now faced consequences she'd helped design for me. Arthur wanted me to protect those with no protector. But Chloe had every protection and used it to murder the provider. I felt nothing. Just hollow recognition. That justice and satisfaction weren't synonyms. Patricia's final "she's gone" mansion is secure. 13 days later, I sat in courtroom 4C for Julian's preliminary hearing. I hadn't planned to attend, but I needed to close one more door. Julian entered in orange prison uniform, hands cuffed. His expensive haircut had grown out unevenly. His skin looked sallow under fluorescent lights. When his eyes found me, something flickered. Hope maybe, or calculation. The judge reviewed motions. The prosecutor outlined charges. Julian's attorney argued for psychiatric evaluation, citing cognitive impairment. Julian kept glancing back. Halfway through I stood. Not dramatically. Just a woman quietly leaving. But as I rose, I deliberately pulled my wedding ring off. The platinum band Julian had chosen. The symbol of vows he'd broken. Choosing murder over marriage. Julian's eyes tracked the movement. I walked past his table toward the exit. In the hallway, I dropped the ring into the trash can beside the water fountain. Didn't look, didn't pause. Just opened my hand and let it fall. The ring hitting the bottom made no sound. I could hear over the bailiff's voice, but I felt the impact. Like a door slamming shut on 3 years of marriage, 18 days of widowhood, and every future, where Julian remained connected to my identity. Footsteps behind me, the bailiff. "You dropped something." "No," I said. "I discarded something." "There's a difference." The ring represented a marriage built on lies. A partnership where I'd been asset instead of person. A contract Julian broke, choosing murder over integrity. Throwing it away wasn't symbolic, it was practical. Trash belonged in trash cans. 7 days later Patricia texted Chloe. "Officially vacated. Mansion is yours." I drove there alone, used Vernon's key. The silence inside felt different than expected. Not oppressive. Just empty, waiting to be filled. I walked through rooms I'd visited dozens of times. As Arthur's daughter-in-law. Seeing them differently now. The study where he taught me chemistry. The sunroom where Chloe received her notice. The dining room where Julian served me drugged wine. In Arthur's study I touched his reading chair. Cracked leather worn smooth by decades. His chemistry journals lined the shelves. Notebooks filled with elegant handwriting. Documenting experiments, theories, observations. Family photographs clustered on his desk. These rooms were his. Shaped by his choices. His failures, his belated redemption attempts. I could preserve them as shrine. Or transform them into something new. How do you transform a house built by a man who failed his children into a home that protects people who have no protector, when you're still learning what protection means? Beyond revenge. I stood in the doorway, understanding crystallizing. Arthur had left me the house, the money, the company, the mission. But he couldn't leave me the blueprint for making them mine instead of his. Owning the mansion didn't mean understanding what to do with it. He'd left inheritance without transformation instructions. Making this the final test. Whether I could build meaning independently of his plans. "You gave me the tools," I said to the empty room. "Now I have to build something worthy of them." I walked to the ballroom. Sunlight streamed through windows that had witnessed 3 generations of Vance. Family failures. And betrayals. The parquet floor needed refinishing. The wallpaper Julian and Chloe had chosen expensive. Tasteful, soulless, needed stripping. I made a decision Arthur hadn't scripted. I wouldn't preserve the mansion. as monument to his legacy, or revenge against his murderers. I'd rebuild it room by room, into something neither Arthur nor Julian could have imagined. Not with contractors or decorators, with my own hands. And the chemistry knowledge Arthur taught me, starting with the East Wing, and working systematically through every corrupted space. The transformation would begin not with money, but with labor. With me physically dismantling what they'd built, and creating something new from the ruins. The blueprints took 4 weeks to draft. The meeting to present them took 20 minutes. To change everything, I spread the architectural plans across Vernon. Sterling's conference table in March. The blueprints, showing how the Vance Estate mansion would become something Arthur had never imagined. A free water safety testing center and domestic violence refuge. Vernon studied the drawings with professional detachment, his expression unreadable. Mark sat beside him, silent, waiting. The East Wing becomes a water testing laboratory, I said, tracing the floor plan. Free services for communities that can't afford. Private labs lead testing, bacterial analysis, chemical contamination screening. I'll run it myself. I have the certification and experience. Mark leaned forward. And the West Wing. 12 private rooms for domestic violence survivors. Secure facility, legal advocacy support. Temporary housing while they rebuild. Arthur said, protect those with no protector. This is how. You're giving away a $75 million estate. Mark said quietly. I'm investing it in Arthur's actual values instead of his family's pretensions. I pulled out a second document. Which brings me to Vance Enterprises. Vernon's eyes sharpened. I had Victoria's team review Arthur's original succession documents. I continued 3 years ago. Julian submitted revised paperwork to the board, excluding Mark from CEO consideration. The signatures were forged. Arthur's handwriting doesn't match. Authenticated samples from the same period. Mark went very still. Arthur's original will named you as his choice to lead the company. I said to Mark. Julian created fraudulent documents to eliminate his competition before he even murdered his target. The conspiracy wasn't just poisoning. It was complete corporate takeover. Planned years in advance. The premeditation stunned even Vernon. Julian hadn't acted from sudden desperation or opportunity. He'd spent years positioning himself, eliminating rivals, constructing infrastructure for theft. Before Arthur ever became ill. I'm correcting the fraud. I told Mark the board meets next week. I'll nominate you as CEO. You're Arthur's biological son. You've worked in the company 15 years. And you're the legitimate heir. Julian tried to erase. Mark's voice came hoarse. You're giving me the position. Julian murdered our father to steal for himself. Arthur chose you. Julian stole that choice, I'm restoring it. Vernon watched this exchange with quiet bitterness. Arthur planned for this too. Not the specifics but the outcome. Everything I conspired to control. Going to someone with integrity. I'll never touch. You can watch it succeed from the outside, I said. Consider it your continuing sentence. The architectural plans transformed the mansion. From monument to Arthur's failure. Into mechanism for Arthur's final lesson. That wealth meant nothing. Unless directed toward protecting people. Who couldn't protect themselves. The mission he'd learned too late. And left me to execute. Mark signed the CEO nomination acceptance. That afternoon. Construction permits for the mansion renovation followed 2 weeks later. By June the East Wing laboratory was taking shape. The West Wing refuge under contract. And in July, 6 months after Arthur's funeral, the final sentencing hearing convened at Cook County Courthouse. I sat in the gallery wearing black again. But this time not for mourning. Just ending. The judge entered. Everyone rose. Julian stood at the defendant's table in prison uniform. Thinner than I remembered. His expensive confidence eroded by 6 months in county jail. Chloe stood beside her attorney, face carefully blank. Warren looked diminished, smaller. Victoria maintained composure. The only one who'd cooperated enough to negotiate mercy. The judge reviewed the case file, the plea agreements, the evidence that had destroyed 4 lives, and exposed a conspiracy built on greed and fear. Julian Mercer, the judge said, voice carrying through the silent courtroom. You are sentenced to 18 years in state prison. For second-degree murder, attempted assault with a controlled substance, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Warren Mercer 5 years. Chloe Vance 8 years. Julianne's shoulders sagged. Chloe closed her eyes. Warren stared at the floor. Victoria Sterling 3-year suspended sentence. Contingent on continued cooperation. With ongoing investigations. You are permanently barred from practicing law. In Illinois. Victoria nodded, once accepting the price of survival. The bailiffs moved forward. Julian turned as they approached. His eyes finding me across the courtroom. I loved you, he said, not shouting, just stating fact. He believed true everything I did. He loved what I represented. Access legitimacy. The daughter-in-law certificate. Proving he belonged in Arthur's world. He never loved me. I didn't respond. Just watched them led away. Julian, Chloe, Warren in handcuffs. Victoria walking free. But stripped of the career that had defined her identity. I thought I'd feel triumph watching them sentenced. Vindications, seeing justice delivered. Instead I felt only weariness. Relief that it was over. Exhaustion from carrying revenge for 6 months. And hollow awareness that Arthur was still dead. Regardless of how thoroughly his murderers fell. The courtroom emptied. I walked out into July sunshine while Julian, Chloe, Warren and Victoria were processed into the prison system. And the victory I'd spent 6 months engineering felt less like triumph than simply the end of carrying something too heavy for too long outside. Detective Dominic Hampton waited on the courthouse steps. Miss Vance, he said, extending an envelope. Arthur left this with evidence lock-up. Instructions were to deliver it after sentencing. The envelope was sealed. My name in Arthur's handwriting across the front. Below it, open after sentencing. I tore it open. Inside a single page. Elena, if you're reading this, you executed the plan perfectly. The conspirators are in prison. The evidence held, justice delivered. Now forget the plan and build something yours. The revenge was necessary. They murdered me and would have destroyed you. But the life after revenge is yours to create. Not mine to script. You have integrity. I never managed compassion, my children never learned. And courage I only found at the end. Don't waste those gifts preserving my legacy. Build your own. Choose better than I did. Choose to become who you are instead of who I needed. The money, the company, the mission, their tools. What you build with them defines you, not me. Make it worthy of the woman who had the strength to see this through. Arthur. I stood on the courthouse steps, holding Arthur's final message. Understanding crystallizing. His final gift wasn't the money or the mission, or the elaborate revenge that had just concluded. It was permission. Permission to stop being his instrument and become myself. Permission to transform inheritance into identity. Permission to choose what came next, without his ghost directing every move. The revenge was over. The conspirators sentenced, the plan executed perfectly. Now the question was who I would become. When revenge no longer defined my purpose. The answer arrived 6 months later. In the form of a woman carrying one suitcase and nowhere else to go. The woman. Standing at the Vance Community Center's entrance. In May 2026 carried one small suitcase. In the same expression I'd worn 13 months earlier. The hollow-eyed exhaustion of someone who'd escaped. Something worse than homelessness. I opened the door myself. The center had been operational for 3 weeks. Water testing lab in the East Wing. Processing samples from 6 municipalities. 12 refugee rooms in the West Wing. Waiting for exactly this moment. "Can I help you?" I asked. Her voice shook. The shelter downtown said, "You take women whose husbands control their finances. Mine froze my account yesterday. I have $43 and nowhere." "You have somewhere now," I said. "Come inside." She followed me through the entrance hall. The same foyer. Where Chloe had received her eviction notice. Where Julian had served me wine laced with sedatives. Transformed now into intake center. With comfortable chairs and privacy screens. Her name was Sarah Mitchell. She became the Vance Community Center's first domestic violence refugee. A 34-year-old accountant. Whose husband had frozen her bank accounts. The day she'd filed divorce papers. The same thing Julian had done to me. Sarah sat across from me in the intake office. Hands clasped tight in her lap. "He cancelled all the credit cards this morning. Withdrew everything from our joint account. Called my boss claiming I'd had a breakdown. And shouldn't be trusted with client finances. I went to the bank and they said without a court order. There's nothing. There's something." I interrupted gently. "We have financial advocates. Who file emergency court orders. Usually approved within 48 hours. In the meantime you stay here. How much does it cost?" "Nothing. The center is fully funded." Sarah's eyes filled. "I don't understand. Why would?" "Because someone did the same thing to me." I said simply. "Froze my accounts. Made me financially helpless. Tried to make me dependent. I had resources to fight back. You will too now." I led her upstairs to room 3 West Wing. Clean bed, private bathroom. Window. Overlooking the garden Arthur had planted 30 years ago. The room Julian and I had once used as guest quarters. Stripped of expensive wallpaper and repainted in soft grey. I placed the key in Sarah's hand. Physical object, solid proof of safety. "You're safe here," I told her. "He can't find you. We're unlisted, encrypted, legally protected. He can't touch your money anymore. We have advocates who file emergency court orders. You have time to rebuild." Sarah started crying. "How long can I stay?" "As long as you need." She closed her fingers around the key. Like someone gripping a lifeline. This is what Arthur meant. Not grand gestures or dramatic revenge. But one woman at a time. Given back the resources. Her partner weaponized against her. Given time to become someone beyond victim. Sarah's tears falling on the room key. Looked exactly like the tears I'd cried 13 months ago in my apartment. Learning Arthur had seen me as daughter. When Julian had seen me as asset. Grief transforming into the first drops of something that might eventually become strength. I left Sarah to settle in and returned to the laboratory. 3 water samples waited for analysis. Lead testing for a school district. Bacterial screening for a community well. Chemical analysis for a neighborhood. Concerned about industrial runoff. Work. I understood chemistry. I could trust problems with measurable solutions. A month later in February a thick envelope arrived. I recognized Julian's handwriting immediately. The return address Statville Correctional Center. The weight suggested 14 pages, maybe more. I stood in the center's small mailroom. Holding the envelope. Imagining the contents. Apologies probably. Justifications for everything he'd done. Repackaged as love or desperation or mental illness. Blame directed at Arthur, at Vernon. At circumstances beyond his control. Requests for visitation, for contact. For some acknowledgement that I still thought about him. A year ago. I would have read every word searching for closure. For explanation. For some statement. That would make the betrayal make sense. Now I understood closure wasn't in his explanations. It was in building something he could never touch. I carried the unopened envelope outside to the leaf incinerator beside the greenhouse. The same incinerator Arthur had used for garden waste. 4 failed experiments. For things that serve no further purpose. I dropped Julian's letter inside. Without breaking the seal. The paper curled black at the edges. Julian's words. Disappearing before I ever learned what they were. And I felt nothing except relief. That his voice no longer had power to demand my attention. The incinerator flames turned the 14-page letter into ash in 90 seconds. Faster than I'd read his morning text messages. During the marriage. Proof that the words of someone who'd lost all relevance burned exactly as quickly as dead leaves. I watched the smoke rise and dissipate into February sky, carrying whatever apologies or accusations Julian had written to an audience that no longer existed. He'd murdered Arthur, drugged me, conspired to steal everything. 18 years in prison was justice. But it wasn't my burden anymore. His explanations, his perspective, his need for my understanding. None of it mattered to the life I was building. The flames died. I returned to the center. In the hallway, Sarah passed me carrying a coffee mug, wearing clothes from the donation closet, looking slightly less hollow than the day she'd arrived. She managed a small smile. I smiled back, then caught her reflection in the hallway window. The same look I'd carried for months. After Arthur's death. Fear mixed with fragile hope. The expression of someone learning to believe safety might exist. I understood then. Arthur's final mission wasn't about protecting strangers. It was about me protecting versions of myself. Women who'd been made helpless by partners, who weaponized money and control. Women who needed time and resources and safety to rebuild identities their abusers had tried to erase. The circle was complete. From victim to survivor to protector. From the woman Julian had drugged to the woman who gave Sarah a key to a room her husband couldn't reach. Arthur had given me the tools. I'd built something worthy of them. The question now was whether what I'd built would hold, or whether the past still had power to break it. The brass key now rested quietly inside a glass case in the intake office, no longer a weapon of revenge but a symbol of rebirth. 25 months after my father's funeral, the Vance Estate mansion had truly transformed. This place was no longer filled with dark conspiracies, masquerading as high society prestige. It had become a sanctuary overflowing with peace. May 2027 brought a gentle spring breeze to Chicago. I walked down the central hallway at 7 o'clock in the morning to check on the laboratory operations. The East Wing was currently processing free water samples for over 40 neighboring districts. Meanwhile, 12 shelter rooms in the West Wing protected women fleeing domestic violence and financial abuse. Sarah Mitchell met me in the corridor, clipboard in hand. Once a victim stripped of every dollar, she had become our head volunteer coordinator after we helped her reclaim control of her accounts from her ex-husband. Morning, Elena. The water samples from the 3 Flint households are ready. I'll send the results directly to them. Sarah smiled, looking at her silhouette. I saw myself from 2 years ago. The dining room, where Julian once served me drugged wine, was now a warm, communal dining space. The ballroom, where I had resolved to dismantle their conspiracy with my own hands, had become a room for legal advocacy and psychological counseling. In the afternoon, the mail carrier delivered a thick envelope. It was the 12th letter from Julian, sent from Statville Correctional Center, Holding the unopened envelope, I walked straight to the leaf incinerator, behind the greenhouse. Without a single shred of hesitation, I dropped it into the roaring flames. His handwriting, filled with desperate pleas for forgiveness, or belated excuses, curled black at the edges, and turned to ash. Within 90 seconds, the old resentment had dissolved, replaced by absolute serenity. An 18-year sentence was the price Julian had to pay, but his soul no longer possessed the power to bind my life. I returned to the greenhouse and knelt beside the ancient saccade, right next to the soil, where I had once excavated my father's tin box. A tiny seedling had proudly sprouted. Its protective thorns were already hardening under the soft, amber sunlight. The saccade was in no hurry. It only needed good soil and time to grow. Neither was I. And finally I had both. As the black ashes from my treacherous husband's desperate letter officially vanished into the freezing winter sky, I stood quietly, looking through the laboratory glass window, to witness the old mansion, which was once besieged by the ruthless poisoning, conspiracies and insatiable greed of those who called themselves family, now truly reborn into a warm community sanctuary, where women, suffering from domestic violence and financial crises, find safe shelter, while dedicated volunteers work day and night, conducting free water safety tests. 4 dozens of impoverished neighborhoods. It was this arduous journey from being a victim, stripped of everything, to becoming the leader of a massive $75 million trust, that helped me deeply understand that the value of true revenge lies not in destroying the enemy, but in the ability to proudly stride on a path of independence, self-creating noble human values, and transforming all past pain into a beacon of light that protects those unfortunate souls who are currently wandering lonely in the dark. My purpose emerged clearly from that structural ruin, ensuring no future generation inherits the silent poison of our shared ancestry. And to you listening to my story, remember, revenge isn't always about destruction. Sometimes it's about building something better from the ruins someone else created. Looking back, I could have walked away when Vernon handed me those medical files at Arthur's funeral. I could have let the police handle everything and disappeared with my $43 and broken trust. But that would have meant letting family betrayal win, letting Julian and his conspirators escape with everything they'd stolen through murder. Don't make my mistake of staying silent when you first see the warning signs. The lesson Arthur taught me wasn't about family revenge in the traditional sense. It was about transforming family betrayal into protection for others. When family becomes your greatest danger, you choose become bitter or become better. I chose to build a refuge for women facing the same betrayal. I survived. The cycad seedling in Arthur's greenhouse taught me patience, slow growth, protective thorns, good soil, time. I believe God put me through this darkness so I could become light for others who can't see their way out yet. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced family betrayal that changed everything? What would you have done in my position? Pursued family revenge or walked away? Drop a comment with your thoughts. If this story resonated, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Revenge Dad for more stories of transformation and resilience. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your presence here matters more than you know. Final. While this story contains fictionalized elements for storytelling and privacy, the lessons about healing, transformation, and protecting those with no protector are absolutely real.